pickles ready. I've put some of the fresh dill from my garden and a teaspoon of mustard seeds in each jar. And these are the cucumbers, the sliced up cucumbers that I put in the saltwater brine last night. And now I'm packing them down in the jar. Jars are cleaned and sterilized and are hot. Well, they cool down a little bit. And it is 2 minutes from when my jars of pickled peppers will be done processing. Okay, part 2. I've already done a few things on finishing up the pickled peppers and the pickles, and now I'm going to talk about how to freeze tomatoes whole. So if they're starting to come out of your garden and you don't have enough of them that you really want to devote to canning them, and you want to wait until you've got a bigger harvest, but you don't want these to go to waste, or you're at the end of your harvest and you've got tomatoes that are either green or there's not that many coming out of the garden, and again, you just don't want to spend a whole day on canning just that few. Here's a really good alternative. You can even do this with all of your tomatoes if you have the freezer space. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to wash your tomatoes, and you can pat them dry. I just kind of roll them on a towel just to get some of the water off. You want to take the stems off. You don't have to. You can leave the stems on. You leave the skins on. They're just having the garden dust washed off of them. And you're going to want to put them on a cookie sheet that has been lined with either wax paper or parchment paper. These tomatoes can be a little overripe, a little underripe, doesn't matter. As long as they haven't started to go off, you're fine. You can put tomatoes, different varieties, in each batch, or you can mix them up. Doesn't really matter that much if you're just going to be throwing them into the freezer just to use later on. And plus, these aren't going to freeze together, so even though you freeze them on the same cookie sheet, you can put them in different bags. So we're going to freeze them the way we did with the zucchini until they're like tomato ice cubes, and that's going to pretty much take at least a few hours. It could take overnight, but once they're frozen, you take them out and you pop them into Ziploc freezer bags and pop them in your freezer. After that, you'll be able to use them, one at a time, several at a time, the whole bag. You can make spaghetti sauce out of them later, or you can even just pull them out and then can them later, when you do have time to devote to it. But it's a pretty simple process. You just need the freezer space to be able to have them be flat so they're not rolling down into your freezer. But other than that, once they're frozen, all you need space for is the bags. And like I said, this can extend the amount of time that you end up spending on canning your tomatoes, So you don't have to feel quite so rushed to hurry up and get at it, because they can stay in that freezer for up to a year without a problem. They'll stay good, they won't turn to mush, and you can use them, you can just take a handful out and pop them into a stew or a sauce. You can take the whole bunch out. They won't ever be like raw tomatoes. You won't ever be able to slice them onto sandwiches unless you like that kind of thing, which I really don't. But they'll be perfectly good for cooking. What will happen when you take them out of the freezer, when you're ready to use them, is if you run them under warm water, the skins will slip off of them, so you won't have to deal with the skins. Or you can just pop them in to whatever soup or stew, and the skins will come off in that broth, and you can just fish them out then. It just depends on how you want to do it. You can even leave them in if you prefer, especially if you're doing like a tomato broth and tomato soup, and you're going to either process or blend it afterwards. Leave the skins on. They have a lot of nutrition in them, so leave them on. So now this tray is ready. As you can see, the tomatoes are not touching each other. I make sure they weren't touching each other. And then I'm going to pop them in just like this into my deep freezer. Tomorrow morning I will take them out and they'll be ready to put into bags. I'm going to do my last batch. And again, you don't have to take the stems off until you're ready to use them. They will come off pretty easily once the tomatoes are frozen. They'll pop right off. And if your tomatoes happen to stick together in the freezing process, that's not a tragedy. And once they start to thaw, they will unstick. It's easier to package them in small batches and to use them just a few at a time if they're not frozen together. And this is the last one, and yes, they can be this big. Oh, it's still a little wet too. There. 2 baking sheets took care of all of my excess tomatoes for now. I'm getting ready to go out of town on a trip, and I don't want these to turn into mush while I'm gone, but I won't have time to really use them. That sun's really right in there, isn't it? But I won't have time to really use them before we leave. So, I've got a few that we can use, but these are just gonna go bad before we get back. So it's better to freeze them and have them for later, even for later in the year. I could just reach into my freezer, grab a Ziploc bag, and there you go. So get the rest of these in the freezer, let them sit overnight. It's done. Now here again, we have another way to do peppers. Same as with the tomatoes. Rinse them to get the garden dust off of them. I don't use pesticides in my garden, so I don't have to really worry about washing anything off of them. It's just a little dust that gets on them. Get them rinsed off, and then you can cut them any way you want. Remove the stems, and then again line them up on a baking sheet that's been lined with wax paper or parchment paper. Do not use like cooking oil or spray oil, because that's just, it's going to end up on your peppers, and you may not necessarily want that. Just cut them up any way you like them. You can just slice them in half if you want to have them as big as possible. You can chop them up if you want to have chopped. It's nice to have that in the freezer to save time when you're getting ready to cook. But yeah, that's what we're going to do with these. These are my poblanos. I only had this many come out of the garden for right now, so we're going to prep them. You don't have to remove the seeds, but I'm going to, because when I use them, I de-seed them anyway. a little more room because I'm going to also be freezing some Anaheims. I've got a bunch of these that I don't want to lose. So put these stems and I do save seeds, so the bigger clusters I'll go ahead and set aside to dry. Slice it in half. I have these Hungarians that I want to do, but I think I might do them separately. I've got a bunch of banana peppers. When they grow crooked like that, it makes it hard to cut them in half. One thing to remember about peppers is that if you plant one kind of pepper too close to another kind of pepper, and I'm talking within about 100 feet of the other kind of pepper, it could potentially cross-pollinate, and you could end up with a sweet pepper that was supposed to be hot and a hot pepper that was supposed to be sweet. But the original pepper plant will continue to produce true, as they say, or it's not going to change what fruit it puts out in that first generation plant. But then any seeds that you take from that plant could potentially have crossbred with others, and because I do plant my peppers close together, I know that that's probably what's going to happen. There, now they're all ready to go. If you don't want that to happen, then a quick solution to that is to overwinter your pepper plants, which simply means that you're going to remove them from the garden if you have a cold climate like I have, and you'll pot that plant and care for it through the winter, and then replant it in the spring after all possibility of frost has passed. So then you'll still have the same parent plant, and it will continue to produce the same level of heat or sweetness as it did before. But again, if you're going to use seeds from that plant to plant new pepper plants, heaven only knows what you're going to end up with if you don't plant them far away from each other in the first place. You could just not bother with it and just hope that they have pepper plants or pepper seeds next year in the garden centers, but this year it was a real challenge to get them. So, you know, you might want to at least store some seeds and try to overwinter your peppers just in case. I mean, it may fail, you may have them die, it happens, but at least you tried.